but here in this context, technically it means suggestion or poetic suggestion. And aloka, the word means light. So the word or the title Dhvanyaloka would translate into the light of suggestion. Or if you want to think in terms of the other name of the text, Sahridayaloka, it would mean a light, or a torch that is provided to the rasikas of poetry, the connoisseurs of poetry, to shine at the various unlit corners of the poetic universe, and you know take in the various beauties and charms of that magnificent landscape. So that is Sahridaya Loka. And the format of the text is something like this. It is divided into four chapters called Udyotas. And Anandavardhana introduces an idea in the form of a verse initially, and that is called Karika. And he elaborates on that idea with the help of prose, which is generally succinct but at times elaborate. And then he follows it up by illustrative verses to elaborate on that idea. These are called Udaharana Padyas or Udaharana Shlokas. And in certain sections of the text, he also gives us a set of verses which summarize the arguments present in that section. So these verses are known by many names. They are called Sangraha Shlokas or Antara Shlokas or even Parikara Shlokas. So this is the format of Dhvanyaloka. And we have many commentaries on this text which also attest to its popularity everywhere in India. The most famous commentary, of course, is Abhinav Gupta's Lochana or Dhvanyaloka Lochana. And even to this day, the tradition of authoring commentaries on the Dhvanyaloka is still present. It persists. For instance, Professor Kuppuswamy Shastri, who was the mentor of Dr. V. Raghavan, he wrote a commentary, a collection of notes, I must say, on Dhvanyaloka, and he termed it Upalochana. So these names are themselves very interesting because Lochana means the eye to look at the light of suggestion. And Professor Kuppuswamy Shastri perhaps thought a pair of eyes is insufficient to look at the light, and he thought Upalochana means spectacles. So one also needs spectacles to look at the light. So there are many commentaries also. And Abhinav Gupta was also a Kashmirian. He lived in the 10th century. The contents of Dhvanyaloka are something like this. Anandavardhana he initially defines Dhvani. He gives us an exact understanding of what Dhvani is and what it entails in poetry. And he also answers various criticisms leveled against the Dhvani theory by people, by his own contemporaries and by people who came before him. Anandavardhana is the first person, as we know today, to propagate the Dhvani theory in its entirety in a logical format. But there were other people also to whom some flashes of this concept had occurred, but more on that later. So Anandavardhana answers some criticisms as well. And then he goes on to say how a process called Vyanjana Vyapara, if Dhvani is suggestion, the process through which it shows itself in poetry is called Vyanjana Vyapara, or the process of signification. Anandavardhana says how it is important in poetry and what are the types of Dhvani, and what is the idea behind classifying poetry as good, mediocre, and bad. For example, we hear people all the time say this is good poetry and this is bad poetry. So, what are the criteria behind making such a gradation of poetry? And he also talks about various ancillary issues such as what does one mean by alankara or figures of speech, and what bestows upon an alankara its alankara-ness. That means how does a figure of speech become a figure of speech? He talks about that, and also about flaws in poetry, about auchitya or appropriateness, and the concept of pratibha or creative imagination and its centrality to the poetic process and things like that. So this in brief is the are the contents of Dhvanyaloka. And what Anandavardhana did was to harmonize all the concepts of poetry or poetic concepts that were thought of by people before him. So what had happened was Indian aesthetics, the tradition of Indian aesthetics, has a very long history starting from Bharata. and before Anandavardhana, all the way till Rudrata, I think, yeah, followed by Bhamaha, Dandi, Vamana, and all those people, they had conceptualized various aspects or elements of poetry, such as alankara, like figures of speech, both figures of sound and figures of sense, and guna and dosha, which means the the good and bad elements of poetry, what makes poetry good and what makes poetry bad, or the virtues and blemishes of poetry, so to say, and the various styles of poetry, the meek and sober and pretty to the elaborate and grandiloquent styles. So people had thought about all of that and worked them out in various degrees of detail. Anandavardhana said, now, so there is something lacking in all these concepts. What had happened was Bharata in his Natya Shastra had bestowed great focus on one concept called rasa. Rasa, I translate it as aesthetic experience. It is known by other names as well. But Anandavardhana somehow thought that focus on rasa has been lost by other people who wrote subsequently to Bharata. Anandavardhana wanted to, bridge that gap, wanted to salvage rasa. So he wrote this Dvanyaloka, and to do that, he came up with this concept of suggestion. So this is one of Anandavardhana's signal contribution to Indian aesthetics, that he harmonized all these concepts and showed how they all work together to accomplish the primary objective of poetry, that is the generation of rasa or aesthetic experience. Why these concepts that were generated prior to Anandavardhana's time, where in what aspect did they lack? It is because these concepts appealed more to the intellect than to the emotions of the connoisseurs. But as we understand, poetry or any art is more of an emotional endeavor than it is an intellectual exercise. So Anandavardhana addressed himself to finding a solution to this problem. And I shall give an example to understand the nature of Dhwani before we actually go into the text, just to get a feel for what Dhwani is. I shall recite a verse taken from Valmiki Ramayana from the Kishkindha Kanda. I shall just recite the verse and give the translation. न च सङ्कुचितः पन्थाः येन वाली हतो गतः समये तिष्ठ सुग्रीव मा वालिपथमन्वगाः. This is a verse which Valmiki has written in the Kishkindha Kanda. A literal translation would be something like this: O Vali, or O Sugriva, the paths that your brother Vali took to travel beyond after death is still not closed, it is still open. You better stick to your words, that means adhere to the agreement, to your promise, and don't follow your brother, that means don't go down that road. But this verse, when one reads it in its isolated format, like just by itself, it does not give us an idea of what Rama is feeling like. Rama is actually saying the verse, but what were his thoughts? What were his emotions that prompted him to come up with this verse? But if you keep this verse in the context of the Ramayana and try to understand it, you know that Rama is actually very furious at Sugriva, because we know from the context of Ramayana that Sugriva had agreed to help Rama in trying to locate where Sita is using his army of monkeys. But it was a rainy season and people couldn't travel anywhere, and Rama was waiting very anxiously for Sugriva's help. But Sugriva was having a gala time back at his palace with his wife and had forgotten completely about his promise to Rama. And Rama is now livid and he sends this message through Lakshmana to Sugriva. Now I shall recite the verse again, but this time with emotion. Please listen. न च सङ्कुचितः पन्थाः येन वाली हतो गतः समये तिष्ठ सुग्रीव मा वाली पथमन्वगाः. That is what Rama says. So how does this happen? If you look at the verse, it has no word or even a set of words that communicates to you Rama's anger. For example, anger has many synonyms in Sanskrit, such as krodha or amarsha or things like that. This verse has no such word, but we still understand Rama was angry, or Rama was furious at Sugriva. So this question, Anandavardhana says, has an answer. That is because of Dhwani. That is because of suggestion, and he calls that Dhwani and the process as Vyanjana Vyapara. And the beauty here is, It is not enough if a person is well versed in the grammar of a subject. Here it is Sanskrit. If it is not enough if a person is well versed with Ashtadhyaya and all the commentaries, and if he knows the various dictionaries and lexica and thesauruses, it is still not enough. Anandavardhana says in his inimitable fashion, Shabdartha Shasana Jnana Matrenaiva Navedyate. Vedyate Satu Kavyartha Tattvajnaireva Kevalam. So one has to be alive to the various nuances of poetry. One has to have a feel for poetry, as it were. And it is not enough if you are a scholar. That is what Anandavardhana says. And his definition of poetry is this. This is called the Dhvanikarika. It occurs at the first in the first chapter of Dhvanyaloka. It is this yatra artha shabdo va tam artham upasarjani kritasvarthau vyantah kavya visheshaha sadhvani riti suribhih kathitah. So Anandavardhana uses the term dhvani in a variety of meanings, in almost 5 meanings throughout the text. Here in this verse, it means a dhvani kavya, that means a poem or a mahakavya that is replete with suggestion. So what are the characteristics of a poem that is replete with suggestion? It means any poetry has words and meanings, right? So those primary words and meanings should play second fiddle to the element of suggestion that is present in a work. And only then, if a work has such words and such meanings in abundance, then that is called a Dhvani Kavya. Even here in the example that I just quoted, all the other words, not all the other words, all words, Nacha Sankuchitah Pansaha, and all those words, they play second fiddle to communicate to us Rama's anger. And that is why that is a Dhvani Kavya or a Dhvani Padya, because it is an individual verse. And if an entire work has many such verses, that gets the appellation of a Dhvani Kavya. This is what Anandavardhana says. And in order to build an entire theory around this single concept, he came up with this beautiful path-breaking revelation about modes of expression. Till that time, people, not just literary theorists, but all other Shastrakaras, they had thought that all expression is just of 2 types. There are only 2 modes of expression. One is Abhidhavritti, the other is Lakshanavritti. Abhidhavritti is the primary meaning of words. Certain words have certain meanings. All of us know that. And Lakshanavritti is, it starts where Abhidhavritti stops. And Lakshanavritti can be best understood in terms of idioms that are very popular, that are very prevalent in all languages. For example, to use an example of English, if a teacher holding a class, if she asks her student to pull up his socks, the child doesn't actually bend down and try to pull up his socks, because all of us, understand what the expression means. Or if one says perhaps that after an initial flourish, their efforts eventually went south, it does not mean that effort eventually traveled in the southern direction, but it declined or it degenerated. So that is Lakshana Vritti. And Lakshana Vritti is found in abundance in our day-to-day conversations in Loka Vyavahara, whereas Abhidha Vritti is in a work of Shastra or in scientific treatises, where the objective is to be very exact and precise in communicating the meaning of texts. But what about poetry? Poetry is not just expounding on a thing in a scientific manner. It is not just our mundane day-to-day conversations. Also, it is something which includes all of this, but is also beyond all of that. So Anandavardhana identified a third mode of linguistic expression, that is Vyanjana Vritti. Abhidha Vritti, Lakshana Vritti, and now it is Vyanjana Vritti. And he went on to elaborate on that aspect very beautifully in his work. And he identifies 3 types of dhvani, basically. And there are also many other types of dhvani, which he talks about, but I shall not go into the details of all the types. But 3 types basically are Vastu dhvani, Alankara dhvani, and Rasadi dhvani. Vastu dhvani is where an idea or an object is suggested. Alankara dhvani entails a figure of speech being suggested, and rasadi dhvani is where an emotion or a mood or a sentiment is suggested. I'm using these words quite arbitrarily here because rasa and bhava, those words do not have exact equivalents in English. Um, uh, in the context of my talk, um, it is I use emotion to denote bhava, and mental states or not mental states also for bhava, and aesthetic experience to mean rasa. So these are the three types of dhvani: vastu, alankara, and rasadi. I shall give an example each to illustrate these types of dhvani, taken from Dhvanyaloka itself, in the first and second chapter of Dhvanyaloka. The examples of Vastu Dhvani is at the very beginning of the text in the first chapter. And excuse me. Uh, the example which I'm going to discuss, I think Suhas also spoke about it when he gave an introduction to Prakrit poetry. Anandavardhana, uses the same example. Uh, so this verse is in Prakrit, but I shall be reciting its Sanskrit chaya, Samskrita chaya. Brahma dharmika visrabdha sa shunakodyam aritastena goda nadi kula lata kunjavasina drupta simhena. So the idea is, there is a girl who is very anxious to meet her beloved, and they have agreed on the rendezvous as well. They have agreed to meet by the side of a creeper on the bank of a river. But there is a problem. What is the problem? There is a sannyasi who keeps frequenting that place. Why? Probably to pick flowers from the creeper. And the girl obviously does not want him there. And she also can't get herself to tell him that directly. So what she says is, she comes up with this ingenious idea. She says, "Oh sannyasin, you were afraid to come here before because a dog was troubling you. It was giving you all sorts of trouble all the time. You need have no fear about it any longer because a lion which was here, it has killed the dog, and now you can visit this place without harboring any fear." But the sannyasin has a greater problem because now he has to encounter a lion than a dog. So what is happening in this verse? It says the girl is actually giving an invitation to the sannyasin to visit the place, but her implicit meaning is for him to run away in the opposite direction as quickly as possible. So Anandavardhana says this is Vastu Dhvani, where the explicit sense of meaning is in the form is in a positive sense. Here it is in the form of an invitation, and the implicit meaning or the dhvanyartha is in the form of a prohibition or a negation. It is something negative. So this is where an idea is suggested. There are many such examples, also three or four more varieties, where the explicit meaning is in the form of a prohibition, and the implicit meaning is in the form of an invitation in a positive sense, and so on. Now going to Alankara Dhvani, which is wherein a figure of speech, mostly a figure of sense, that is being suggested. Anandavardhana gives an example of a figure of speech called Yatha Sankhya, and this is the verse. Ankuritah pallavitah korakitah kusumitascha sahakarah. Ankuritah pallavitah korakitah kusumitascha hridimadanah. This is a verse. It means the setting of this verse is in spring in the Madhumasa, and the verse talks about as and when the mango tree which blooms in spring, as and when it swells, sprouts, buds, and blossoms, in that same order, Manmatha, or the god of love, the deity of love, he swells, he sprouts, he buds, he blossoms in the hearts of lovers. So this is an example. And Anandavardhana identifies the figure of speech that is suggested as Yatha Sankhya, and that is popularly translated as relative enumeration, because the same set of adjectives that is used to qualify one noun are the same to qualify another noun. Here the two nouns are, one is the Sahakara or the mango tree, the other is Manmatha or the deity of love. And all the adjectives that qualify both of them are the same, Ankurita, Pallavita, and so on. But since both nouns are equally important in this verse, Alankarikas would generally think that the figure of speech present here is Tulya Yogita, which is another figure of speech. But Anandavardhana says the Dhvanyartha or the Pratiyamanartha, which we get from this verse, is much more charming, much more enjoyable than what appears at the surface. So that is Alankara Dhvani. And in fact, Anandavardhana has a very beautiful karika or a very beautiful shloka at the beginning to communicate his idea of dhvani or suggestion. He says, Pratiyamanam punaranyadeva vastvasti vanishu mahakavinam yat tat prasiddhavayavatiriktam vibhati lavanyam ivanganasu. So he talks of dhvani as the charm in women. He likens dhvani to the charm in women, which which stands apart from the beauty of all other individual attributes. So dhvani in a kavya is not alankara, is not riti, is not guna, is not vakrata, but it stands beyond all these poetic concepts and marks the ultimate beauty of a poem. So that is one verse which Anandavardhana says. And now coming back to the types of poetry, the third type is called rasadidhvani, where an emotion or a rasa itself is suggested. And Anandavardhana illustrates this by taking a verse from Kalidasa's Kumara Sambhavam. It appears in the sixth sarga or canto of the poem. The verse is like this: Evam vadini devarshau parshve pitur adhomukhi leela kamala patrani ganayamasa parvati. This is Kalidasa's verse. And the context is something like this: Parvati has performed penance and has won over the love of Shiva, and Shiva has sent a host of sages or or rishis to Parvati's parents, that is Himavan and his wife, to ask for Parvati's hand in marriage. And when everyone has come and Himavan has agreed, uh, then a Brahmarshi or a Devarshi called Angiraha or Angiras, he lapses into a praise about Shiva, about Parvati and everyone involved. And Parvati is naturally very shy. She is standing by the side of her father, who is Himavan. And the poet says, Adhomukhi, she is looking down. And what does she do? She has a lotus in her hand, which she apparently used to carry around everywhere. And she starts to, count the number of petals of the lotus there. Obviously, she did not have any interest in getting to know the number of petals which are actually present in the lotus, but she had to do something in order to, mask her shyness, mask her vrida or lajja or whatever. And this verse exemplifies Rasadidhvani in that it communicates a bhava or a transitory emotion. Lajja in Sanskrit poetics is thought of as a vyabhichari bhava, uh, or a sanchari bhava. It is a transitory mental state, and that is communicated, that is suggested, that is evoked through this verse. And like I said, there are many other types of dhvani as well. Um, those are quite nuanced, but Anandavardhana basically classifies them under two major heads. One is Lakshana Mula Dhvani, one is Abhidha Mula Dhvani. Abhidha, like I said, is the primary meaning, Lakshana is the secondary meaning, and dhvanis that arise, that get generated from these two modes of expression are called Avivakshita Vachya or the Lakshana Mooladhvani, and Vivakshita Anya Paravachya is Abhidha Mooladhvani. So Vivakshita Anya Paravachya means this. We intend one meaning, we intend a word in a particular meaning, and if that gets another meaning thanks to the context in which that is used, that is Vivakshita Anya Paravachya. And there are great number of types which are subclassifications of these initial varieties. There is Arthantara Sankramita Vachyadhvani. There is Atyanta Tiraskrita Vachyadhvani, which is very interesting. And that means, all words have certain denoted meanings. And suggested meaning is so potent, is so powerful that it sidelines the denoted meaning completely and comes to the forefront. That is called Atyanta Tiraskrita Vachyadhvani. For example, in the verse I quoted from Valmiki Ramayana, the Vachyartha or the primary meaning is completely set aside, and the What we focus on is on Rama's anger, right? So that is Atyanta Tiraskrita Vachya Dhvani. Those are the Upaprabhedas or subclassification, subtypes of Lakshana Mula Dhvani. And Abhida Mula Dhvani has Asamlaksha Krama Vyangya, Samlaksha Krama Vyangya, and a host of other things. I shall not elaborate much on any of those. Asamlaksha Krama Vyangya, if I have to explain very briefly, is the sequence of occurrence of suggestion is so swift that we do not understand, we cannot understand it at all. We cannot come to terms with it because it all happens so swiftly. In the verse from Kumara Sambhava, as an example of Rasadi Dhvani that I mentioned, none of us understand that Parvati really wanted to know the number of petals in the lotus. We effortlessly understand that she was shy. So there is no point A and then point B takes over. Okay, from till point A to point B, in this region, Parvati is trying to count, and suddenly at point C, we understand that she is shy. There is no such sequence of happenings. So all that happens very swiftly, and that is why it is called as Asamlaksha Kramavyangya. Samlakshya or Samlakshana is a process that can be that is easily intelligible. Asamlakshya is a concept that is otherwise. So those are the types of dhvani, and I must also say that one should not get the impression that dhvani is restricted to individual verses alone. No, not at all. Even entire segments of a poetic work or even an entire work can evoke suggestions in various forms and in various capacities, and those are very much important than these suggestions that we get from individual verses. For example, a prakarana, which means an incident or a string of events in a poetic work, can also be full of suggestion. And uh, to give a popular example from English literature, because everybody can follow it very easily, um, I shall take an example from Harry Potter, which I think all of you will be familiar with. There are many instances, but I shall talk about only one of them, to which is emblematic of something called Sanketa Dhvani, which Anandavardhana does not talk about, but I think it is in close relation with Prakarana Dhvani. In Harry Potter, all of us know there is the platform 9 3/4 where there is a wall, and a person has to walk through, a wizard. He has to walk through in order to, grant entry into Hogwarts, in order to sit in the train and then travel to Hogwarts. But that wall is actually is in the Mughal railway station. It is there for everybody to see, but only those people who have that magical capacities, who are inherently magical in some sense, they can walk through that wall and grant entry into some other places. So the same applies to Diagon Alley, which is there for everybody to see, but only certain people can use it to go beyond. So the same applies to the telephone booth that grants access to the Ministry of Magic. So many things like this, right? So the idea or the suggestion is that though all things are available to everyone, only people who have a flair for it, who have an inherent competence for certain things, they can use those opportunities to travel beyond the the stultifying and the humdrum of daily life, so to speak. So that is a suggestion in Harry Potter as well. I said this, I spoke of this example just to impress upon all of you the fact that the theory of Dhvani as thought of as Anandavardhana is applicable to not just Indian literature or not just Sanskrit poetry, but all world literature. We can analyze any poetic work or any literary theory conceived at any point anywhere in the world using Anandavardhana's Dhvanyaloka, and that is why I said his is one of the finest minds that India has ever produced. And Prabandha Dhvani also, which means the suggestion we get by reading a great novel or a great Mahakavya. For instance, at the end of the Mahabharata, after Pandavas have won over, the kingdom and have defeated all their enemies, Yudhishthira says, Jayoyam Ajaya Akaraha. What does that mean? You get a sense of, it is called Nirveda in Sanskrit. I do not know of an exact equivalent in English. So you get that bhava after all that. And even in the case of Kalidasa's Raghuamsham also, at the end of it, Kalidasa from the very beginning narrates the lives of great kings such as Dilipa, Raghu, Aja, Rama himself, and all those people who were remarkable in their own right. And then finally comes Agnivarna, who, when his subjects wanted to see him, he deigned to make himself seen by his subjects by placing his left foot out of the window. Kalidasa says, darshanam prakriti kangshitam dadau kevalena charanena kalpitam. So this is the fall that Raghuamsha met. So the suggestion is that it is not enough if you are heir to a certain legacy. With great power comes great responsibility, as all of us know. If a person is not responsible enough, if he does not have the competence to take that system which is already in place forward, then regardless of his high birth or regardless of his capacities, he will meet his downfall. So that is the Prabandha Dhvani of Raghuamsha. And all these things come together in a work of art, and Anandavardhana speaks of that. This is not just restricted to a work of poetry alone. It can be used to analyze any art like music, like like sculpture, or like a beautiful painting. If there is an aspect that appeals to you in any work of art, in order to analyze that, you can use this concept of dhvani very efficaciously, and therein lies the greatness of Anandavardhana. And he speaks about how all constituent elements of poetry, starting from nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, indeclinables, how all of them can become, boats or vehicles of suggestion. And he gives a very beautiful example again in the context of Ramayana. Nyakkaro yayameva me yadarayaha tatrapyasau tapasaha सोऽप्यत्रैव निहन्ति राक्षसकुलं जीवत्यहो रावणः धिक् धिक् क्षत्रजितं प्रबोधितवता किं कुम्भकर्णेन वा स्वर्गग्रामटिका विलुण्ठनवृतोच्छूनैः किमेभिर्भुजैः. This is a verse that Anandavardhana quotes in order to illustrate how every single small element of poetry can be full of suggestion, can be vehicles of suggestion. Here, this is a verse that is said by Ravana because Rama has come to his place, that is Lanka, and even when he is seeing, even when Ravana is seeing, Rama is, raising down his kingdom. He's killing all of his men one by one, and Ravana is absolutely, flabbergasted. He says, "Nekkaro hyayameva me yadarayaha." It is absolutely disgusting for me that I have not just a single enemy, but multiples of them. Before that, Ravana did not have any enemy at all. So this Bahuvachana, Arayaha, is the plural. Tatrapyasau tapasaha. Rama has come with a whole army of monkeys. That makes the plural, that accounts for the plurality of the enemies. And tatrapyasau tapasaha. This fellow appears like a hermit. He appears like an anchorite. He was wandering around in the forest, and now he has come. Sopyatraiva nihanti rakshasa kulam. And even as I see, he's bringing down all of my allies one by one. The Jivatyaho Ravanaha, and I'm still alive. I can't believe that at all. Dik Dik Shatrajitam. My son is called Shatrajit or Indrajit, Shakrajit, who waged a war against the Lord of the deities themselves, himself Indra, and he defeated him, Indrajit. Dik Dik. He is absolutely useless because even he is not able to do anything here. Prabodhitavata king Kumbhakarnenava. And even if Kumbhakarna is awakened, if you wake him up, he will not be able to do anything. And these arms of mine, they are just unnecessarily fattened by defeating a mere hamlet of a city, a mere hamlet like Swarga. So Ravana is so furious that he calls the Swarga as a village, as a mere hamlet. He calls it Gramatika, not even Grama. The Strilinga is noteworthy here. So, the linga, the vibhakti, the vachana, the indeclinables, the prepositions, everything here in this verse is so full of suggestion. And Anandavardhana talks about that very beautifully. And as I said, there can be, samasas such as bahuvrihi or the compounds, which can also act as vehicles of dhvani. Bahuvrihi I say very importantly because it is called Anya Pada Pradhana in the Sanskrit, in the tradition of Sanskrit grammar. For instance, if you take the word Chakrapani, it means Vishnu. Chakram Pano Yasya Saha Sa Chakrapanihi Bhagavan Narayana. But neither the word Chakra nor the word Pani refers to Vishnu. But those two words, when clubbed together, brings out the meaning, generates the meaning Narayana. So there is a sense of suggestion that is hardwired into this samasa that is called Bahuvrihi. Like that, there are various alankaras that Anandavardhana himself talks about, like Samasokti, Paryayokta, Prastuta Prashamsa, and so on, which are full of suggestion. So now you can see how all aspects of poetry, regardless of their nature, they can be small ones, they can be big ones, or efficacious, not efficacious. Regardless of all that, they can be suggestive. So Anandavardhana identified that. And he also talks about alankaras or figures of speech in his work. And though ancillary to his discussion, he gives us very great insights into what is a figure of speech actually. He says, रसाक्षिप्ततया यस्य बन्धः शक्यक्रियो भवेत् अपृथग्यत्न निर्वर्त्यः सोऽलङ्कारो ध्वनौ मतः. This is a beautiful phrase which he has coined, aprathagyatna nirvartya. So he says if one has to if one has to come up with new figures of speech, one need not, try or think too much. If a person is aligned to the rasa, if he knows very clearly inside his head that what he wants to communicate in terms of the emotions, the aesthetic ambience of the work, if it is very clear in his head, then as and when he starts writing, these alankaras or figures of speech or turns of phrase, they will occur to him by themselves. And the poet need not take any additional effort to create such alankaras. He calls it aprathagyatna nirvartya. And he also says, Kalecha grahanatyago nati nirvahana ishita. This is also very important. Excuse me, because Kalecha Grahanatyago means a poet should know to what extent he can, develop an alankara. Just because he is gifted with the power of words, he should not go on creating one alankara after another, because that might prove to be off-putting for the readers. So he should know where to start and when to stop. So that is Kalecha Grahanatyago and Na Ati Nirvahana Ishita. He should know how to handle it in a very optimal manner. Some things are beautiful and some things are beautiful only in a certain way. So you should stop after a thing has been sufficiently developed. Anandavardhana himself says, Deeptasya punardeepanam doshaha, doshatvaya kalpate. That means to say, if a character has been developed to a certain extent and a certain rasa is being communicated by virtue of that, you need not take additional efforts in order to develop it further. So it is already developed. Overdoing it will cause distress to the Sahridayas. So Anandavardhana also gives a voice of caution at this juncture, and he says, Nati Nirvahana Ishita. So these are the derivatives we get from Dhvanyaloka. This is not Anandavardhana's primary objective, but these are so much important to understand poetry as a well-rounded poetic endeavor. So, and he also talks about the flaws in poetry or doshas. People before him and people even after Anandavardhana, they have gone into monstrous lengths enumerating the flaws in poetry. For example, if you look at the 7th chapter in Mammata's Kavya Prakasha, which is the Dosha Prakarana, he talks about all sorts of doshas, be that as it may. But Anandavardhana says, Avyutpatti krito doshaha shaktya samvriyate kavehe kintu यस्त्वशक्तिकृतस्तस्य झटित्येवावभासते or sajhatityavabhasate. It means to say that if a poet commits a mistake, if a poet commits a flaw in his poem, that is because of his lack of scholarship or his lack of erudition, then that can be easily salvaged if he is a vyutpanna in terms of pratibha, if he is endowed with poetic creativity, with creative imagination. But if the flaw stems from a lack of creative imagination, then nobody can save it. No, nothing can save it at all. So Anandavardhana here, in a roundabout manner, he is talking about the centrality of Pratibha again, in not just in poetry but everywhere. Pratibha is an inherent strength of all artists, that is creative imagination. And he also talks about auchitya or appropriateness, which is so much important. Auchitya is some convention followed by a band of rasikas in certain periods of time in a certain place. So, for instance, what appeals to us in 21st century in Bangalore might not be the same taste cultivated by a set of people, in Kashmir, in somewhere in 8th century India. So, a poet, when he is writing, though he has to anchor himself to certain ideas that do not change, that have a space-time neutral appeal, even so, he has to cater to the understanding or cater to the auchitya, appropriateness of people of a certain of certain coordinates of those place where he the target audience whom he tries to address has to be very clear about the auchitya. And Anandavardhana also has a very interesting thing to say about poetic liberty, and this is very interesting for us today in this age, because there is a hue and cry about intellectual property rights, and about plagiarism, and to what extent we can retell poetic works. We discuss those things time and again, right? So Anandavardhana says, Santi Siddharasa Prakhyaha, Yecha Ramayanadayaha, Kathashraya Nateir Yojyaha, Svecha Rasa Virodhini. So there are certain poetic works which absolutely serve their purpose of being, poetic, of evoking rasa or sentiment in the connoisseurs. But they also are so powerful that they become symbols of an entire tradition, of an entire heritage, such as Ramayana and Mahabharata in our country. And Anandavardhana calls them Siddha Rasa. That means to say the appeal in those texts are already fixed. And if a poet wants to use those works for his own poetic creation, Anandavardhana says, toying too much with these works will not be very good. People will not respond in a positive way if you take too much poetic liberty with those works. That does not mean to say that you have no freedom at all, but if you are basing your imagination on popular works, you better adhere to the emotional ambience that the initial poet had taken so much pains to create. That is also a responsibility on your part, is it not? So Anandavardhana also gives us a caution about that. And having given all these rules and ideas of suggestion one after the other, he comes up with this really great statement. He says, you should not blindly adhere to rules. So very rarely does a Shastrakarya himself says, don't adhere to the rules that I am, elucidating. But Anandavardhana, because he is a great Shastrakara, he says that Sandhi Sandhyanga Ghatanam Rasabhivyakti Vyaktapekshaya Natu Kevalaya Shastra Sthiti Sampadana Nechaya Natu Kevalaya Shastra Sthiti Sampadana Ichaya. These are Anandavardhana's exact words. So Sandhi and Sandhyanga are related to dramatic works more so, but they can also be applied to narrative poetical works. Bhamaha does that in his Kavya Alankara. And Anandavardhana says, you should not be, you should not think too much about the rules while actively composing poetry, because the creative imagination itself takes a back seat. That should not happen. You should, give the primary focus to rasa, and the rules will follow. Otherwise, you can create your own rules, which of course is in line with these time-tested concepts. And because Anandavardhana here says, he gives the example of Veni Samhara or some other poetic work such as Ratnavali, which is another favorite work of our aestheticians, where they say those works, if you read them, they appear like the author had this textbook or the manual of rules before him, and he followed one rule after the another and wrote examples in his work. It should not appear like that. So Anandavardhana is also very broad-minded in that way. And he also says, Natu na sarvatra dhvaniragina bhavitavyam. This is again a mark of his genius. A person who has conceptualized Dhwani himself, he says, don't look for Dhwani everywhere in a poetic work. Because, there are aspects in poetry which are beautiful by themselves, and suggestion marks for the overall beauty of poetry. For example, I spoke about the gradation of poetry, right, as Uttama, Madhyama, and Adhama. There, Dhvani Kavya is a poetical work that is full of suggestion. Guni Bhuta Vyangya Kavya is where the manner, the nature of poetic expression is very beautiful, and the suggestion plays second fiddle to it. And Anandavardhana gives a beautiful example. Though the time is short, I cannot not say this example. He says, Anuragavati Sandhya Divasastat Purassaraha Aho Devagatih Kidrit Tathapina Samagamaha. That means to say the evening or twilight is red. That means she is full of love. And day, he is always face to face to her. That means he is ready to unite with her. But because of certain circumstances beyond their control, they never meet. Like all of us know, once the twilight or the evening ends, the day also stops. The two of them never meet. So the suggestion we get of this two is, though two people are passionately in love with each other, uh, because of certain things which are not under their control, they might not meet, they might not get united at all, which is very sad and depressing. And Anandavardhana says, because the primary focus of this verse is about the twilight or Sandhya and the Divasa, and the manner of expression of this verse itself is very beautiful. The suggested meaning does not occur to the connoisseurs at the very first instance. But however, there are claims to confront Anandavardhana at this point. Modern scholars such as Kuppuswamy Shastri, Dr. K. Krishnamurti have spoken about this at length. Even an ancient aesthetician such as Jagannatha Panditaraja, while devising his own scheme to grade poetry such as Uttamottama, Uttama, Madhyama, and Adhama, he gives an answer to this. And he says, Guni Bhuta Vyangya is Uttama Kavya and not Madhyama Kavya. But be that as it may, it is mere hair splitting. And there is other type of poetry called Chitra Kavya also. During Anandavardhana's time, people thought that, or Anandavardhana was of the opinion that Chitra Kavya, you might all be aware because Dr. Shankar is on close terms with all of you. It is constrained poetry, and it is very, very difficult to compose such poetry. So if you spend so much of your efforts and poetic talent in try to compose a verse that after its composition perhaps takes the pattern of a lotus or a wheel or some such thing, it is very difficult to make that verse suffused with rasa and bhava. So Anandavardhana relegated that type of poetry into the adhama format. But as Dr. Shankar has beautifully demonstrated to all of us, even Chitrakavya can be composed in a lucid way, can be evocative in terms of rasa also. But I must also say that Dr. Shankar is an exception. So Anandavardhana's words, they stand true to a large extent. So these are some of the things that he speaks about in Dhvanyaloka. And he says that Pratibha is so endless, there is no end to it. It is so all pervasive that दृष्टपूर्वा अपि ह्यर्थाः काव्ये रसपरिग्रहात् सर्वे नवा इवा भान्ति मधुमास इव द्रुमाः. He talks about the salience of rasa. That means to say, even if you look at a poetical work multiple times, if you read a verse that is beautiful multiple times, that does not lose its charm. There is so much of meaning that is embedded in it that you will voluntarily want to visit it, willfully want to visit it multiple times. So that, as the famous statement goes, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. Anandavardhana expresses the same in a roundabout fashion. And he also talks about so many other things, but I think the time is up and I shall stop with this. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I shall be very happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, sir, for that magical talk. It seems like you are one of those rare people who can see the magic in everyday words and suggested meanings in words. So we had a very good session today. We'll take questions now. If you have any questions, please put it up in the chat box and we will take them. Okay, so Dr. Menon is saying that it's a very interesting pick and interpretation from Harry Potter and Hogwarts. Perhaps, ma'am, would you like to say something?
Well, Meera, I didn't want to say anything.
Okay.
Basically, it's very, very interesting, and I try to understand the whole idea of Dhwani through articles, people who speak about it. But I didn't know Dr. Shashikaran before until Dr. Shankar has invited him and your team has invited him. It was so cogent, it was so lucid to understand what he was saying. So I thought Dhwani is such a complex topic, no one would understand. But I think by bringing in even Harry Potter and Hogwarts, and I think he has given a nice tangent to make sense of it. It was so beautiful to listen to him. And I think his lecture itself is suggesting that there is much more to Dhwani than we have understood. So thanks for that.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, sir. We'll take a question from Sudha, ma'am. If she is here.
I've unmuted Sudha, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, it was a wonderful lecture. Thank you so much. I have a problem with the connection. I might just, in between, just get disconnected. So my question is, you spoke about Abhida Lakshana and Vyanjana. I just want to know if Anandavardhan is accepting Tatparya as, the. So,
Yeah.
So-
Thank you for raising that. Thank you for raising that question. There is another mode of expression called as the Tatparya Vritti, mainly accepted by the Mimamsakas, or the people who try to understand the meanings of Vedic works, right? Those are called the Mimamsakas. But Anandavardhana also has spoken about it, and he has argued for the presence of Vyanjana Vritti by pointing out the inadequacy of the Tatparya Vritti also. He does that in the third chapter, third Udyota of Dhvanyaloka. So you can please have a look.
thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am and sir. We have a question from Dilip HR. Dilip, sir, are you here?
Yeah.
Yes, it was a wonderful session. I have a question. So, is the concept of Dhwani essentially related to Kashmir Shaivism, or is it independent of it?
Kashmir Shaivism or Pratyavijna Shaiva Darshana was certainly prevalent when Anandavardhana wrote his work, and Abhinav Gupta, being the master commentator on Dhvanyaloka, also subscribed to that school. He has written a number of works like Tantravata Dhanika and so on Pratyavijna Shaiva Darshana. But Dhvani Siddhanta itself is not, very much related. It does not have a Samavaya Sambandha, so to say, with Pratyavijna Shaiva Darshana.
I have one more question. So can you briefly explain the difference between Dhwani and Vakrokti?
Surely. So Vakrokti is a general term in poetry which is concerned with expression, how you conceive of alankaras. For example, a mundane everyday expression, if it has to be transmuted, if it has to be transformed, so to sound poetic, you add certain things, right? And that is what makes it poetic. Vakrata literally means oblique or oblique expression. So you say the same thing, but in a different way. That is Vakrata. And if it is expression, it has to go. It has to do with expression, but Dhwani has to do more with impression, with how people understand it. So Vakrata is important from the perspective of the poet, and Dhwani is more important from the perspective of the connoisseur or the Sahradaya.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Ananya, you have a question. She wants to know the names of commentators. Ananya, are you here?
Good evening, sir. Yes, I'm here. I want to know the names of the commentators regarding Dhvanyaloka, without whom the elaboration of it is incomplete.
Yeah, surely. The tradition of commentaries on the Dhvanyaloka goes back to times even before Abhinav Gupta. In fact, since you brought this up, there is an interesting tidbit which Abhinav Gupta himself mentions. We come to know that an ancestor of Abhinav Gupta had written a commentary or a set of notes, perhaps, we do not have it now, on the Dhvanyaloka, and Abhinav Gupta criticizes that, and he says at one point, Alam vivadena asmat purvajais sakam. So says, enough of nitpicking with my own ancestors. So the tradition goes back to those periods. And there is, of course, Abhinav Gupta's Lochana. Then there is something called as Kaumudi, then the Upalochana, like I said, and so many other works. We have English translations by Dr. K. Krishnamurthy, and who has done a critical edition of Dhvanyaloka. And there are many Hindi commentaries also uh, on the work by contemporary aestheticians. They are published mostly from Chaukamba Vidya Bhavan. So you can have a look.
Sir, I have one more question. Sir, I need help. Sir, I'm a student of Masters in English. I want to know some books about Dhvanyaloka. That would be helpful for literature students.
Okay, all right. Like I said, there is a translation of the entire text with elaborate introduction and notes by Dr. K. Krishnamurthy. It is published by Motilal Banarsidass, and there are many more works. For example, Professor Kanti Chandra Pandey has written about Dhwani in his work on Indian literary criticism. Dr. Nagendra has a work on Dhwani, and many more people. If you happen to read Kannada, there is a great work. Dr. K. Krishnamurthy himself has translated, and he has written an independent treatise on the nature of Anandavardhana's conception of Dhwani. But in English, Professor Lawrence McRae has done great work regarding Dhwani. He has his papers, I think, are available online. You can please have a look.
Thank you, sir. And we'll take 2 more questions, and after that, we'll take further questions in the WhatsApp group if possible. So, Sankita ma'am, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. In fact, I don't know whether it's a question and whether I make any sense at all in what I'm trying to say. When we enjoy a poetry, we don't have a segregated perception of, let's say, the primary meaning and perhaps the layered impressions which we get through suggestions. And I think, as you said, Dhwani is an impression, and
Right.
you were saying Vakrokti is more
Of an expression, right.
from the poet's point of view. So cognitively, it's very interesting to see how does such a overwhelming impact is created by a beautiful poetry, and several of the verses which you shared as well. So we cannot say it is the primary meaning which is coming, which is evident to everybody, and then later the suggestive meaning, layered complexity comes. But in fact, they all come as like, a flash of 100 suns together, or perhaps, multiple flutes being played at all times. That is just an overwhelming experience, though we know that there are these different tunes or different instruments playing at the same time. So that's what I wanted to ask about your thoughts on that.
Yes, so poetry itself is an organic experience, or I must say rasa is an organic experience. And in order to arrive at rasa, all these constituent elements, not just Dhwani and all its, all its constituent features, but all other poetic elements, right? Like Alankara and all those things, they work together to bring about that experience. And how we try to understand it in psychologically or in terms of cognition, that still has to be worked out. But as far as the impression itself is concerned, Dhvanyaloka is very clear about, basically there is an idea that occurs to a poet, and if he is gifted with the power of words, he expresses them very beautifully using Vakrata or Alankara. And what happens is that he talks in terms of plots and characters and so on. And in trying to read all those together, he creates some junctions or some places in poetry which are full of suggestion. And Sahridaya, when he is reading all that, he does not, deconstruct the piece of poetry in terms of these elements, but all those, occur to him at the same time. So that is how it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir and ma'am. Sanjana, would you like to ask your question?
Hello, sir. Thank you for your talk. I really enjoyed it, and glad to see another Harry Potter fan in the crowd. But I had a question that relates to how the theory of Dhwani relates to performance. or like when poetry is performed. So in the case when we're performing poetry and the emotion is conveyed not just through the words but also through like intonation or hand gestures or your tone or rhythm, like how does that so how does this theory of Dhwani explain that, and does that mean suggestion is taken away from the words and kind of taken away by these aspects of performance, or is it enhanced by these aspects of performance? So yeah, I hope my question makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. I shall try to answer it. Like I said, Dhwani is not really tied down by linguistic factors like words and meanings. You can also have Dhwani with, emotive factors such as expressions, by gestures, and even with music. Anandavardhana himself talks about music in the 3rd chapter. But across all formats, words and their meanings happen to be the tools with which you communicate your idea in literature. But there are different tools in different art forms, such as there is Shruti and Laya in music, there is Sthiti and Gati in dance, and so on, right? So all these tools of different artistic avenues or different media of art, they can be suggestive. For instance, in dance, if a person, if is dancing, or even if you are performing poetry, like you said, or let me say in dance, if one person is using some hand gestures or some emotions to communicate the fact that the sun has set, that is all. And people understand it by means of hand gestures. And no words and no meanings are used. That single statement, communicated through hand gestures, that the sun has set, can be understood in a variety of ways by different people. For example, I might be in a morose, I might be morose at that moment. I might be, I'm feeling some melancholy or something. And I might relate the sun going down to be conducive or to be in line with my own emotional landscape at that point in time. But some other person might not think so. The sun going down to an office goer might suggest that it is time to go back home. So these are many different things, right, in poetry. So all those things can definitely be vehicles of suggestion.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. One more question, if that is okay.
Sure.
Amrita.
Okay, great. So Amrita, who is also a scholar and working on Dhwanyaloka, has a question, so we'll hear from her.
Excellent.
Thank you, Shashi. It was very nice and lucid talk. So I had one particular doubt with the verse that you said about Evam Vadini Devarshu, right? So that was given as a example for Artha Shakti Dhwani in Dhwanyaloka as verse number 22, which comes as an example for Samlakshakrama. But you have taken it as an example for Rasa Dhwani, which comes as an Asamlakshakrama. So like ma'am also said, for Rasa, it comes as a flash of light, where there is no kind of particular pattern that we can trace up to for understanding the rasa. So
Right.
when we take the text as a whole, it is okay to understand the verses might help in understanding the rasa as a whole. But when we take that particular verse as an example for rasa dhwani, how did you come about that? That was one question. And one
Sure.
more thing, can you just differentiate between Shabda Shakti Dhwani and Slesha? Because that was one thing that I find difficulty in understanding with respect to Dhwanyaloka. Thank you.
Okay, surely. So to answer your first question initially, the Samlakshakrama Vyangya and Asamlakshakrama Vyangya, I said in the backdrop of the context, since the context is very well established because we know the verse is taken from Kalidasa's Kumara Sambhava, and we know how Parvati was feeling at that moment, and we know, the Shiva and the whole storyline. It is Asamlakshakrama Vyangya because the primary purport is to communicate to us Parvati's shyness, right? So that is why it is to do with bhava, the Vyabhichari bhava, and Rasadhvani communicates itself through Asamlakshakrama Vyangya and sometimes through Samlakshakrama Vyangya also. So you can use this as a marker. If the context is very well established, if it is not an isolated verse, it can happen with isolated verses also. But as a general guideline, if the context is established and everyone is clear about that, it can be Asamlakshakrama Vyangya. If the poet has done a very good job of suffusing that verse with rasa or with bhava or anything like that. Now to the second part of your question, Shlesha and Shabda Shakti Mooladhvani, right?
Yeah.
So, Shabda Shakti Mula, they have a connection, but Shabda Shakti Mula Dhvani is something beyond Shlesha, because Shlesha has to do with the conjoining of words. There is Abhanga Shlesha and Sabhanga Shlesha, where you know parse words and still the Shlesha occurs, or there are two meanings, and then there is not. But Shlesha is just with one meaning. It does it is just at the most it is two meanings, right? By the power of the words involved in that Shlesha. But the impressions that a poet or a Sahridaya gets of a Shabda Shakti Mula Dhvani is so much more than this Shlesha, which retires after communicating the meaning, the intended meaning in that situation. For example, a Shlesha can give a maximum of two meanings. So, but a Shabda Shakti Mula Dhvani can go beyond that. So that is the sphere of influence, and that is the point of demarcation.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Now we will. I hear that there are more questions. So if there are, we will take it in the WhatsApp group. With that, I request Preet to please give a formal word of thanks.
Thank you so much, Meera. Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful talk. On behalf of Team CSP, I would like to convey our gratitude to you for giving us such an insightful talk. And I would like to thank Professor Sangeeta Menon, who is the head of the department in the School of Humanities at the National Institute of Advanced Studies. Constant love and support. Thank you so much, ma'am. And I would like to mention that our next session is Kavyalap by Vidya on the 20th of October with a wonderful lineup of poets, and looking forward to your presence on 20th of October at 4. Thank you so much, one and all, for being here today. Namaste.